Well, let's bring in General Jack Keane, retired four-star general and Fox News senior strategic analyst. Jack, General, excuse me. The Putin raising the nuclear deterrent. How should we think about that? Is that alarming, or is that something that you think that is a natural thing for him to do, or is that an escalation that we need to be really concerned about?
Well, he used language that was implying nuclear weapons the other day when he was talking about severe consequences. And so clearly, I mean, Putin is escalating here, certainly in terms of rhetoric. What that translates to on the ground, we don't really know. I mean, so the American people understand is Putin has ICBMs in silos and submarines at sea with nuclear weapons every single day like the United States has, and they're ready to go. They don't have bombers on alert, nor do we have bombers on alert as a result of New START treaties. We don't know if he's activating those bombers and bringing them up to some kind of alert status. Our intelligence service certainly knows that. And we don't know if it means that he's actually moving tactical nuclear weapons, which are lower yield nuclear weapons, largely used in support of military operations, not the strategic weapons that are designed to take out major cities. We don't know if he's redeploying those. Our intelligence service will have to get on top of that. But I mean, on the surface of it, he's attempting to shock the world that such a grave situation is being done against him, that he finds no alternative but the threat and the use of nuclear weapons. I think this leads to more isolation of Putin, to be frank about it. Also demonstrates, I think, a side of him I think the more people are becoming concerned about, and that is his obvious paranoia here when things aren't going well for him. But the United States should be unequivocal that we're not going to stand for his bullying and his intimidation and his coercion and sort of shock effect. But at the same time, let's find out what's actually happening on the ground.
All right. I also want to ask you about get your assessment of how the Ukrainians are doing and trying to fight back. I just want to read one thing from a senior defense official at the Pentagon yesterday that said, "We continue to believe, based on what we have observed, that this resistance is greater than what the Russians expected. And we have indications that the Russians are increasingly frustrated by their lack of momentum over the last 24 hours. As of this morning, we have no indication still that the Russian military has taken control over any cities." Is that your assessment, and can that last?
Yeah, it's a staggering assessment, and the Ukraine Air Force is still flying, and their air defense is still operating. This is after 4 days and 5 nights of an invasion. There's no doubt, and our intelligence services has evidence, they've talked about it, that the Russian military leaders here who are executing this operation are very frustrated. Their logistics lines are breaking down. As we've said before at the outset, this operation is very ambitious and incredibly complicated, attacking on 4 independent axes, all requiring logistic support and also air support. Very complicated, and they're not able to execute anywhere near their own expectations. But let's see it for what it is. I think Putin has overreached here in invading Ukraine, and I think there's significant long-term consequences here for him, Dana, dealing with the Ukrainian people. You think he would get it by now. I mean, the reason why he took Crimea and went into eastern Ukraine in 2014 is because the people of Ukraine ran out Yanukovych, who was Putin's Russian stooge, ran him out of the country. That's how strong these people want democracy. 8 years later, despite the intimidation of being on Ukrainian soil, the people never turned towards Ukraine, was what the people in Ukraine never turns towards Russia, what Putin expected. What do they turn to? They turn towards the West. They want prosperity. They want freedom. And that is why we're having this invasion. He fundamentally doesn't get the Ukrainian people and their steadfastness and commitment to their country and what they're willing to do to protect it. Yes, he'll eventually topple this government, or I don't think Zelensky will surrender it. And there will be resistance and an insurgency that will grow out of all the people who are opposed to this takeover. He will deal with this for years. He's going to also become more of an international pariah as a result of it. He's rejuvenating NATO. The organization, Dana, this doesn't make any sense. The very organization that he's been undermining for over 20 years and trying to weaken. His actions here are going to strengthen NATO. we're going to finally have more of an effective deterrence in Eastern Europe, something he's fundamentally opposed to, you know, as a result of it. And given all the sanctions that take place, and I think more to come, more serious ones, actually, the people in Russia, whose economy is already suffering with unemployment, low per capita income, the ruble is tanking, inflation is spiraling, they're going to be adversely affected. And certainly that pressure is going to be felt on Putin and his regime as a result of all this. He has overreached long-term adverse consequences as a result of this.
Maybe one last comment from you, sir, if you could, about NATO and the strength of NATO, and do we have what we need there as a NATO organization to deal with what could be coming?
Yeah, so our people understand. Listen, NATO's the largest alliance ever put together. There's 30 nations in it now. There's 3.5 million troops. And we got huge economic heft. I mean, we're talking about most of the European nations and the United States. That is huge. But at the same time, we have let this military organization deteriorate after the collapse of the Soviet Union. We do not have, particularly in Eastern Europe and particularly in the Baltics, the kind of military deterrence, physical presence on the ground to deter Putin's aggression. We got to fix this, and it has to be done with a sense of urgency, and we've got to fix the U.S. defense budget and also the defense budgets in Europe. Good to see the Germans are going to up their percentage of GDP on defense to 2%. That is a major transformation.
That was eye-opening indeed.
So our own people understand we can't deal with the Russian threat, the Iranian threat, and the China threat at the level of defense spending we're at right now, which is a little less than 3%. We can't get there. We have got to increase it.
General, thank you, and we will stay in touch with you as these developments continue throughout the day. Thank you so much.